So I want to walk through this project. I want to start with why is this being pursued, and then get to what is it. Matt's going to help with some slides along the way, and then be happy to take questions, and then we'll wrap up. So go ahead. So you remember, most people in this room remember, 96 and 2007. 1990 was another catastrophic flood. That happens to be Centralia at Mellon Street, in the Mellon Street area, those neighborhoods. Okay. That's from Chehalis looking north. I-5 is there. I-5's under here. The Burlington Northern Rail line's under there. And when you get I-5 shut down and the Burlington Northern Rail line, you've got a major, it's not just a local issue now, it's a state, regional, even a national. There's livestock, cows. Impacts are not just on residential houses. The flood, after the 2007 flood, the state commissioned an analysis of how much damage was caused from those 5 days of catastrophic flooding, and it was $923 million. And about $300 million of that, they estimated, was from I-5 and Burlington Northern, mostly lost commerce. About $500 million of it was Lewis County, families, businesses, schools, public infrastructure. Okay?
By the time I got back here, there was already 3 feet of water in the barns, in the middle of the barns already. And so I started moving heifers through water, and they're as big as, 300-400 pounds up to springers and dry cows, bigger heifers. And got them out here, through the water, and then down the road. And by the time I got back, I was swimming. You couldn't walk anymore. I mean, before you could walk, you could wade through it. But by this time, I was swimming in it. Most of the little ones died. They couldn't, because there was 6 feet of water down there. Yeah.
Wednesday morning, we buried 60 of the 100 head that I had here, and the other 40, we don't know where they are. I came from the barn to the house in a pair of hip boots, and the current just about took me away. Went in the house and we started picking stuff up, and within 45 minutes the water was coming through the floorboards of the house, so we carried as much stuff as we could upstairs and evacuated upstairs, took the dog up there with us, and at 3:30 they took us out of the house by boat, and the water was 8 feet deep. The biggest mistake I made when we were moving stuff upstairs, I came to this bedroom window on this side of the house and opened it, and I heard my cows thrashing and dying, and I looked out, the water was already hood deep on the tractor, and there was no way to get to the cows to try and save them. If I would have turned them out, the current was so strong through here, they'd have all washed away anyway.
Most of the families that get hit are people who can afford it the least. Some people who have higher income live on the floodplain, but by and large in most communities in the country, probably the world, people with wealth tend to live on higher ground, and people who don't tend to live closer to the waterways, and that's definitely the case here. Okay?
I really don't even know how many milk cows we've lost. Volunteers coming out of the windows, and I'm just overwhelmed with all the volunteers. And yeah, John had a lady come by and hand us a $100 bill. Don't even know it. So that's my story. And and you okay? I don't, with it staying this way, I don't have nothing. I don't have an income, so, okay. Well, the decision was made, and we're all starting it. And hopefully we don't have another flood like this.
Okay. So, in in the late 1920s, the federal government put a gauge in the river at Grand Mound, the Chehalis River, and so you have a consistent data point almost a century now that you can see any day what's the flows of the Chehalis River over that period of time. And what you see, obviously, here are the six largest flows have occurred since 1986. And we've had a remarkable run, I think, since 2007. 2009 was a very big flood. You remember the flood we had, 2022, January? It was a big flood, but it was not, those two were not catastrophic floods. I mean, the damage estimates were in 20, 30 million versus 90, 96, and 07, which are in the hundreds and hundreds of millions of damage. But we've gone a long time. I mean, by this reckoning, we've actually gone a long time since 2007. And the question isn't, well, is that going to happen again? The question is, when's it going to happen again? And how many times is it going to happen again? And I am a lawyer from Chehalis, and that part of that goes with that is I am not a climate change scientist or any other kind of scientist. What you had a reference earlier to hotter, drier summers, and the counter to that on the forecast is you're going to have more of these catastrophic storms, the kinds that have been hitting California time and again in the last several years. Just a comment that I've learned. Now, because of satellites, you can see around the equator there's this circle of water that keeps turning all the time, all year round. Every once in a while, in the winter, one of those little fingers breaks off and comes northwest. And well, they've been hitting California several times, a lot of times the last couple of years. But that's what results when one of those pineapple expresses, they call them, hits here. And it's going to happen again, and it's going to happen again and again and again. So, all right, keep going. So there's the flip side of the bigger storms in the winter, hotter, drier summers. The projections for some of the major fish runs in the Chehalis Basin all look like that. They all say, here's where we are now, which is a considerable decline from where it might have been decades ago, and the forecast without this habitat work is forecast to be here. And so you got two problems that the state cares about in the Chehalis Basin that come together here. One is, what can you reduce the catastrophic flooding? The second is, can you enhance the fishery? And which leads to what Rick already told you, and that is our charge of this office is to address both those at the same time, which is why the Chehalis tribe and the Quinault Nation are at this table, as well as me and some other local people. So those are the two charges that we have under the law. Okay, so now we get to where there's PL. Obviously, we're downstream Chehalis. The project that's under consideration is just above PL. All right, so, sorry, here's some math. I'm sorry, that's the way hydrologists speak, is in math. So if you go on any USGS website right now, any waterway in the United States, you'll see the flows measured and shown by CFS, cubic feet per second, right? And so what's that? So the cubic foot is about 7.5 gallons of water. There's 1 cubic foot of water. So 20,000 cubic feet of water is what I'm going to speak to right now. So what are you looking at? So there's the peak in red is a 96 flood that USGS says is a 100-year flood, which is a stupid, I wish they wouldn't use that term, but there's considered now the sort of normal catastrophic flood. All right, in the upper Chehalis River, and in that flood, the peak flows were 49,000 cubic feet per second. Okay, there was the peak flow in that storm. The peak flow in Oakham is 13,000 cubic feet per second, Skookumchuck 11,000 CFS. All right, so the flood we had most recently, 2022, same on the Skookumchuck, another 1,000 CFS on the Oakham, but it's 14,000 CFS lower than the 96 flood was on the upper Chehalis. So what? Well, so what is all those pictures you saw and all the film you saw? That's the difference, because we all just lived through the 22 January flood, big flood, but it was not a catastrophic flood. So that much water coming down the main, and it wasn't the Skookumchuck, right? That wasn't the difference. It wasn't the Newaukum. They were the same. The difference was the big pipe, the main stem. So this project up above PL will hold 62 to 65,000 acre feet of water. Okay, what's that mean? Well, that means 20,000 cubic feet per second less water down the main stem for almost 2 full days. That's how much water that is. Okay, well, what's 20,000 cubic feet per second? Okay, 7.5 gallons, right? Is 1 cubic foot times 20 is, there's 1 second. There's 1 second of water, if less, coming down the main stem. Then you multiply it by 60 seconds, there's 1 minute. You have 9 million gallons times 60 minutes, there's 1 hour. That's how many gallons of water come past the fixed point at 20,000 CFS. 1 hour is 540 million gallons. And a day, it's 12.9 billion gallons of water. So, and we're not talking about the total amount of flood water. The total amount of flood water is bigger than that. We're just talking about the margin of reducing by 20,000 CFS for almost 2 days. You get that much less water coming down the big pipe from PL all the way down to Cosmopolis. So that's why we're pursuing this. All right. This is from the city of Centralia. We asked the public works people, what's the difference in Centralia between the 96 flood and the 2022 flood? And all of these public facilities and businesses and so on were whacked in 96 and of course again in 07, and they were not whacked in the 2022 flood. It is as if, go back one slide if you would. Two. It's almost, well it is I think, as though nature showed us in 2022 what the value of storing that much water above PL would be. Right, now go ahead, 2 slides. There's the difference for that one community. But it isn't, as you know, it isn't just Centralia. All right, next. There's Centralia in the 07 flood, and everything you see in yellow striped, there and there and there, was flooded in 07, but would not have been flooded had you held back that much water above PL. And, I mean, there's the high school, there's nursing homes in here, there's Washington Elementary here, and the hydrologist will tell you, there are a lot of homes in this area that they show on this slide as blue, meaning the ground is flooded, but it's the difference between 3 feet and 1 feet, and if your house is a foot above the water, yeah, your yard's covered in water, but your house isn't whacked. So there are actually more families protected even than is shown here. Okay. So here's what happens downstream and how far downstream you have a benefit from holding that much water. And it's larger than this above Doty. I think the y-axis has it like 10 to 12 feet. But downstream, let's see. South Fork, the Chehalis. This is blue is 07. Red is the 100-year 96 flood. Let's see. You get to Mellon Street, and you can say, well, gee, it's only just a little under 2 feet in the 96 flood. Only a 2-foot reduction in Mellon Street. Yeah. Well, that's not. Oh, the river's in its banks. It's 2 feet higher or lower that we can see every day, depending upon how much rain. That's 2 feet when the water is in that early slide you saw, when basically it's an inland sea there. 2 feet out of that is the difference between a catastrophic flood in Centralia and not. And here's something interesting. People say, well, this is just a Centralia-Chehalis benefit. No, it isn't. You find a significant reduction in Montesano all the way down to Montesano of a foot plus in the 07 and all the way down to Cosmopolis, about a half a foot in Cosmopolis. The hydrologists will tell you actually have a benefit into Aberdeen, but by then the tidal impact is so big you can't predict the benefit from it. But there will be less flood water coming down the Chehalis River at least, even that far down. Okay. All right. So that's why. So what? The project that is now in front of the U.S. Army Corps and the Department of Ecology for this federal and state EIS looks like this. And if you want to ask questions about exactly how it works, that's why Matt, the engineer, is here. But that's what it looks like, and I'll talk about how it's different. Okay, next slide. That's kind of from the ground level. Here's how a cartoon version of how it will operate. You probably already know this, but the big difference is this is not damming up the Chehalis River 365 days most years. The gates are at the bottom, unlike a typical dam. And the fish can swim up and down it. It will stay open until you get one of these catastrophic storms. Oh, sorry. All right, well, maybe I'm narrating. All right, we're downstream here. There's the facility. There are the gates. There's where the fish can swim up and down. You look behind it, there's no reservoir. Okay, so we're just, I don't look at this in a while. This is day one. Okay, I think we're about to have a storm here, right?
Yeah, yep.
All right, there's the Chehalis River flowing down through the facility. All right, now pretty soon we're going to get a storm.
So the unique thing about this project is that this is actually designed for fish passage, for the sediments to flow through, and so you minimize a lot of the impacts of a regular, typical dam with this type of
Here we
design.
got the storm going. For day 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a few. Day 14. Okay, now that the storm's passed, it's being evacuated. Now we're at day 19, 20, and the temporary reservoirs going back down. Here's some things I know that aren't accurate. One is, you all know this, I've learned that if you drown a fir tree for a day or two, it's going to die. So there won't be nice fir trees all the way down to the river. So the district is proposing that the trees fir trees along there will be cut down and replaced with deciduous trees that can survive being underwater for a few weeks at a time, as the case may be. So there's a real overview of where this project sits. NEPA and SEPA boring government processes, but that's the current timeline. A couple of general comments. One is, because of the nature of how the state set up this Office of Chehalis Basin with tribal representations, environmental representation, as well as community, the state's not going to come in with just a check for us on the flood side. Here, you just go solve the flood problem. But they're also not going to come in with a check just to solve the Chehalis Basin fish problem either. Both of those problems, because every other basin on the West Coast has fish problems. And the only way we're going to get the resources to continue with both of these objectives is if we stay together and all the different points of view figure out a way to move forward. And that's not easy, but we've come a long way. And these slides don't cover this, but there have been over 100 flood projects done on time, on budget, benefiting virtually every community in the basin already, and there have been a lot of habitat projects that are already done. And it's done because we've all figured out a way to keep making steps forward together. So I'm going to address Vince's presentation from a very different way, because what I'm not going to do is debate Vince about geology, because I'm not a geologist. So I thought about how could I address the concern about this thing not being safe. And I will I'll just tell you my perspective and how I have confidence in it. In 2008, probably 6 months after the 07 flood, the PUD hired Shannon and Wilson engineering firm, and the PUD said, are there places here that you could store water that would benefit in downstream in one of these big floods? And Shannon and Wilson looked at half a dozen sites, and including this one, and said this would be the most beneficial. Why? Because you have the most water. People often ask, well, why would you pick that particular spot? And the answer is, if you look at rainfall, I forgot to do this before I came back, it's been a couple years, but rainfall here is 35 inches or so. PL is about 70 inches. Up in the Wolfhot Hills there, it's more like 100 to 130 inches rain. And you can see, Vince will correct me if I'm wrong. But,
No, it's right.
Okay, somewhere in the vicinity. And you already saw, that's where the main stem, that's the big pipe. So if you're going to store water that benefits the most communities downstream, that's where you're going to capture the most. So that's why that particular location. And you can't just, oh, well, we'll just stick a dam on the Newaukum River and you'll have these benefits. No, you won't. So there's one. Why is it there? Okay, Shannon and Wilson did their first analysis in, say, 2008. The Army Corps had looked at this in the 30s or 40s as for the same benefit. And Shannon and Wilson came back and said this is an ideal, geologically, this is an ideal spot to store this much water. That's not the end of the show. That's only the beginning. The state has a dam safety office, and they reviewed Shannon and Wilson's evaluation and said this looks safe. That's not a final answer. Those are beginning answers. And safe at that point means it's worth evaluating, right? It's not go ahead and build it. We're not at go ahead and build it yet. So then the governor's work group was begun, which is the forerunner of Office Chehalis Basin. And in about 2014 or 15, at the end of that biennium, we had about $2 million remaining with discretionary funding out of the capital budget. And the board said, we need to spend that on the geotechnical evaluation. Why? And here's why. Because we need to know if this site's safe. Because if it ain't safe, why would you spend any money on it? And that evaluation was done. That was the first boring. And that came back saying this looks like an ideally suited site to store this much water safely. And then in the last year, another round of boring was done, and this summer there'll be another whole lot more boring done. So that's what the flood zone district has to come back and show the agencies. If this project gets through the EIS process, then it gets into permitting, which is even a deeper dive into all the questions, as you all probably know if you've gone through these processes. Well, under federal law, because this facility is within a short distance of PL, only about a mile, it's what's called a high hazard dam. And that doesn't mean the dam's more hazardous, it means there's a community nearby. So that it's a hazard, obviously, if it fails. That thing has to be built to survive to a 5,000 to 10,000 year earthquake, or it's not going to be built. And it isn't the consultant's opinion, it's the state and federal agencies. We had a meeting several years ago in PL when there was a local guy who was saying the PUD is going to build this thing for power generation, and they're going to build an earthen mud wall, and it's going to collapse, and it's going to kill all the children in the PL school district. And I get to speak to that group. And so I went through this, but then when I explained that this is not going to be this giant amount of water sitting above PL 365 days a year. It's not even going to have water behind it other than the river running most days, most years. The state in their draft EIS did a calculation of what are the odds that this thing happens to be full And now you get the Cascadia subduction zone, the biggest earthquake anybody can imagine, and the thing fails. What are the odds of that? 1.1 and 1.2 billion. You got a lot higher chance of dying on your drive home than that. So take my word for the geology? No way. But there's a process to protect communities in these processes. And I've got a memo from the HDR geologists that anybody can read on why they believe this site can be and will be safe if this thing is constructed. My last thing to have you consider on this is what are people's motives here? Which elected official, state, federal, local, wants to put their name, public money behind something that's going to collapse and kill everybody in PL? I mean, is that like, yeah, no problem. Do people have a motive to build something here that's going to fail? From day one, my view has been, that's the first question, right? Forget all the downstream benefits and all. If it isn't safe, it can't be built safely, then you think I want to put my name on it? I mean, I thought about this today. Now you're my jury, right? I'm going to do something I never have done before in my life, and I probably won't ever do again. This is from 10 years ago, after my dad died. Chronic water. Great man remembered, headline. The community lost a great man of the passing of Jim Eversted. He appears to have left behind a trail of lasting friendships, an untainted reputation, and a legacy of support for the city of Chehalis and its residents. Sorry to do that. That's my name, too. You shouldn't trust me that the site's safe. But I think you can trust my motive, that I'm not interested in having my children go down in history as the kids of the guy who sold the community down the river and everybody died because the thing collapsed. I think you could trust that.
So what are the next steps, and is there a vote? I mean, do the people vote on this, or what are the steps?
Right now, there's not a public vote planned. There are a lot of different public bodies involved. We had a meeting today. The Lewis County Commissioners are the supervisors of the Lewis County Flood Zone District, and they appropriate dollars that comes from the state to further this EIS process. So there's people who get elected, obviously, who are involved. Your state legislators have been forwarding money, have been supporting getting money in the state capital budget that has funded both the fish work and the flood work. Those are two direct public.
So right now, it's on track for happening.
Well,
Or is it?
that's a good question. And the question is it on track for happening? What it's on track for is get through the EIS process. And the federal and the state EIS processes will say, we think this can be built without significant environmental harm or not. And if they come back and they say, you know, terrific environmental damages that can't be mitigated, it obviously makes it less likely that this thing gets built. If they come back and they say that the mitigation, especially on the fisheries side, that the flood zone district is proposing is feasible and we think the impacts can be mitigated, then I think it becomes much more likely. So I'm not giving you a straight answer. Yes, it'll be built. No, it won't be built because I can't say that now. I can say, I guess I could say a couple of other things. There's a proposal now on the table, also before the Office of Chehalis Basin, that to build a levee plan, levees, 24 miles of levees through Centralia and Chehalis on the east side of the freeway. And that's another large, very large proposed flood reduction measure. And the Chehalis Basin is going to have done a side-by-side cost benefit on both those so the public can see. I think that this proposal benefits more families, more communities, more businesses and transportation than a levy on the east side of the freeway does through some Chehalis. But
Question on your photo you have there on National Avenue overpass, I-5 was non-existent.
yeah,
How much will the water level proposed with a reduction in feet and inches is going to be seen at that point? With a comparative flood, let's use 07, because it seemed like we're skipping over 07 for some reason in my observation. We're using 96, so another later date. But my point is, tell me how much reduction, are we going to have a foot, 2 feet, 10 feet, what is it?
so let me answer it two ways. The state talks about the 100-year flood because, anyway. That's
Well,
like-
I've been through about 1,000 years. What's that?
I will answer your question directly. If this had been in place in '07, instead of being covered for 5 days, I-5 would have been closed for covered for 22 hours.
And
And
what depth?
no, that's a good question. It would be, the only portion of it that would have been covered was between 13th Street and where the freeway goes, around Green Hill. And they think they can put Jersey barrier, not Jersey barrier, but they think they can build concrete.
No, I understand that, I understand that. I want to know what's the level.
Okay.
The reason I ask is I have 21 inches of water in my house.
Yeah.
I mean, if it only lasts for 3 days versus 5 days, my house is still wet.
Right. Okay. So there are the
Right.
levels of reduction all the way down the basin. Actually, the flood zone district now, thanks to GIS, you can see exactly on your property how much, if you're in the floodplain, you can see exactly how much lower the flood
I
level is.
appreciate your optimism, but I have a hard time buying into that.
Okay.
Okay, it's just my personal preference, because I mean, I'm not a geologist, as you said,
Nor
you're
am I.
not a whatever. I'm a realist. I mean, I've had my feet wet at times. When we have property at 180 feet of sea level, and Montesano was at 30, that's almost flat as a piece of glass. And but if we're going to spend that kind of money, I don't see why we can't have I-5 stay dry.
Jay, I just want to add one little piece. So this project isn't just the flow-through dam. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is actually the levee that goes around the airport. And so I think where you do see the largest inundation of I-5, where you get the really deep depths, we're actually improving the levee in those areas to actually keep the water off of I-5 in those areas. And so I think that might be one of the reasons why.
It's the combination of the dam and
Yep,
the
exactly.
will keep the.
Yeah, the project's actually two parts. It's improving the airport levee, raising it, then also the flow-through dam. And so those in combination are what protect I-5. And so I think that's why maybe there's a little bit of a.
That's why we brought this in there. Yes, all the attention is on
Yeah.
the facility of FPL, but just a little history. That airport levee was, well, the airport, Chehalis Airport, was built by the War Department, World War II, so they could land Boeing bombers for flight, for training. And they built a levee around it, because of course they built it next to the river. And that levee sat there till about 4 or 5 years ago, when the Chehalis Basin funded, and it was not safe. And that spot, we've been told, at West Street, is the lowest, between Mexico and Canada, that spot is the lowest compared to the surrounding water table of anywhere between Mexico and Canada on I-5. Not sea level, but the surrounding water table. So there's the first place I-5 floods. And so whether it's this project or someday WASDOT, we have, the Chehalis Basin is funded, you've paid for it, widening and making that levee safer. The next step is to raise it. So right at that, as Matt says, the most vulnerable spot, that is another component of this project.
Yeah.
Jay, regarding the 2014, I called the Department of Transportation guy down in Vancouver, and he explained to me the details of what they had to do, there's that low spot, and they had to break a levee, right, in 2007?
Yep, the airport levy.
They had to be broken.
Right, because there was risk of failing
It's
before
a,
it was widened.
yeah, and it's a low spot there.
Yep, that's right.
And that's where it's 10 feet over.
Yeah, and so I think these flow depths, this is taken from the main, this is probably taken from the main channel, so you're
By
not
the
seeing
way,
stuff behind the levee. It's actually,
This is at the airport levy.
yeah,
It actually goes up to 10 feet.
so,
Yeah. So there's I-5 needs to be raised. So you're saying they're looking into it and they're gonna start?
Well, if you read that report, in fact, we just had a repeat of it 2 months ago from WASDOT. They looked at that. They looked at raising I-5. They looked at 5 different options besides this
I
one.
read the report.
Okay, so the report says, yeah, you can raise I-5. The problem is, it's way more expensive than doing this. Why? Because if you raise I-5, guess what else you have to do? You have to raise all the bridges. And think about the rock, never mind the rock and the asphalt to raise I-5, but you also have to raise those bridges. So WASDOT decided that that was not cost effective, and that this alternative was more effective.
Yeah, I read that,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, in some ways this reminds me of the debating science in the forestry world. And my conclusion after a lot of years in those debates, I've kind of decided that social license is far more important than all the facts and figures and all that stuff. So could you talk to the politics of this? I do remember at least one of the tribes came out opposed to that. Where are they at today? And can you talk
Sure.
about the politics?
Sure. So a couple of times in the last few years, I've been asked by the paper about some action that the Off-Shale Basin took, even if it's unanimous. And they've said, well, did the tribe support it? I said, oh, yes. And then I've gotten chewed out. Don't try to speak for us. So I don't. I think it's safe to, well, but based on their statements,
Right.
neither the Quinaults nor the Chehalis like this proposal. I mean, do you want to build this thing in the Chehalis River? No. The question is, in the end, we saw the fish decline, and I guess, why don't you go back to that slide? Because I didn't really talk about that very much. So the green there is, so the yellow or the orange is the forecast for fisheries numbers for this, which one's this? Spring Chinook, for example, but steelhead, fall Chinook, coho, it's all the same basic decline forecast over the rest of the century. The green is what happens if you do all this habitat work. You can, according to
By this habitat, you mean the dam?
no,
Oh.
the habitat work that's being done
Okay.
as part of this
Yeah.
process, as part of the fish side of this project, part of this process. Yeah, unconnected to whether or not you build the thing above PL. That's the only way the science says you're going to save a fishery in the Chehalis Basin. Well, if my original premise is right, and that is there isn't just going to be a big fish check from the state, there isn't just going to be a big flood check from the state, but both of these have to go forward together. That's what's kept everybody at the table. That's what's kept everybody at the table so far. In the end, if this thing gets through the EIS process safely, successfully, and gets into permitting, will the tribes then say, no, we're done? They might. I'd say, then we're done with the whole process. We're not just done on the flood side, we're done with the whole thing. So that's the fullest answer I can give you.
How did the fish protection and this dam get put together?
Well, it goes back to 2012. The history in this basin on both these problems is not good. It's fighting, right? Somebody proposes a flood control project. The fish people say no, and then there's been fighting for 100 years. There was a catastrophic flood in 1933, and there was a lot of government over, we're going to do something, and it devolved into fighting. In 1946, President Truman signed legislation giving the Army Corps of Engineers authority to solve the flooding problem in the Chehalis Basin. And here we are. And why? Because it's just been this. Well, for the first time in 2000, and after the 07 flood, if you read the stories of the flood authority, it was just a fist fight for 4 years. And I was never a supporter of Christine Gregoire. I was a Rossi guy, but she saw that flood, and in her last year, she called together Chehalis Tribal Chair, Environmental County Commissioner from Thurston County, and one of her staff, and then 3 people on the flood side, including me and Jay Gordon, who you may know, Gary Farmer from Elma area, and Vicki Raines, who's still County Commissioner down Grace Harbor. And she said, I'm on my way out, and this is probably July. She brought in a facilitator, and she said, if you people can't agree, just go home and we'll just wait for the next flood and just watch the fish die. But if you can agree on a step forward together, I'll put that into my outgoing capital budget. So the first few meetings were more of this, and finally, the facilitator said, well, what if you could make progress on both problems at the same time? Well, that's a novel idea.
That's brilliant.
And, yeah, and it is, what I would say is, it is shared interest, different interests, but shared interest in having the process go forward. So, in the end, will they oppose or support? But I'd say there's a lot at stake on both sides to have this whole process continue to go forward. I've got one more on I-5 and numbers and all that. I'll throw out one more. 65,000 acre feet, okay? That's 62 to 65,000 acre feet is what we're talking about holding here, okay? In the 07 flood, at the Grand Mound gauge, close to 300,000 acre feet of water went by in those 5 days. So we're talking about holding 20 to 23% of it. And again, we saw the difference in 2022. That's not me throwing out, that's not me being a hydrologist, but those are just the numbers of the volume reduction. So if you reduce the 07 flood by 23% of the water, the hydrologists tell us you've got that kind of significant flood reduction.
Yeah.
And you.
Yeah, in 2007, my family and I lived in Curtis, and like in 1990 and 96, we had a little bit of water in the yard, and in 2007, it was at the tops of our windows. So we almost put a home back there and ended up moving out of the valley.
Yeah.
My question about this dam proposal is another safety question, and it's not related to geology. But in that 2007 flood, part of the problem was there were, I think, like in the Seattle Times, they talked about a dozen major landslides that came down with all that rain. About a dozen major landslides came down around between like Baja Peak and TL, bringing down all kinds of timber.
Yeah.
And my concern, my safety concern about this dam would be if you have another event like 2007 and you fill that reservoir to the top, and then you start getting landslides bringing timber down into that reservoir, you're going to have a flood wave go over the top of the dam. And maybe the dam would withstand it, but if you look at, floods where water has gone over the tops of dams, they can be pretty darn destructive. And if I lived back in Curtis with this dam in position, knowing what I know about, flooding and stuff, I would not sleep any better at night than I would with no dam. Just because a big part of the problem in 2007 was from all of those landslides. and the chance of having a landslide go into the reservoir, or multiple ones, and shoving water over the top of the dam would not make me feel safe. And you guys may have, brainstormed that whole scenario, but I haven't heard it talked about very much.
Okay. Question.
Yeah, so the landslide issue, we've actually, so Shannon Wilson actually did a lot of work mapping all the landslides up in our reservoir area. And so those have all been mapped out. They've also been looked at for risk in terms of where the toe of those land versus the reservoir. And when we're developing operations a little further, but one of the risks with reservoirs is how fast you draw it down. You got to make sure the water gets out of the soil before if you draw it too fast, it's still kind of water laden soil. It's heavier and it would want to slide, and so that's one of the things you look at is how fast you draw it down and make sure you draw it down at a slow enough rate that the water has time to get out of the soil. And so it's definitely a known risk that the engineers are paying attention to, mapping all those landslides out, looking at it when they're looking at operations. And so it's definitely something that's, as Jay's saying, when we get a permitting, it's even more scrutiny looking at those. And so what we'll end up doing is the ones that are unstable for safety reasons will actually be stabilized prior to any operation. And then the other ones will actually be monitored as well, even throughout the life of the structure. That's a kind of a high level, but more detail, obviously, as we go into permitting on each one of those landslides.
As a layperson, the one thing on that risk that there's a landslide when the reservoir is full, the one thing that I've been told that makes sense is the risk isn't when the reservoir is full, because then you've got water
Pressure.
holding back landslides. Risk, as Matt said, would be later when you've saturated the hills and then you lower it. The only other thing I'd say is there are people looking very carefully at that, and there are federal and state agencies asking all of these questions plus a lot more. That's
in 2007, when we had like 20 inches of rain in 36 hours up there, it was all coming down at once.
Yeah.
I mean, it was all happening at once.
Yep.
So just on your follow-up on that, I don't know, it's not as much concern about landslides in the reservoir basin itself, but upriver. Right, because part of this event is there were landslides in artificial dams, and those landslides further upriver, and then they were overcome, and you have this giant wall coming down the river. So are they looking at the impact of that from upstream in the system coming down? How can you possibly ameliorate every potential landslide form upriver, or however many miles the main thing goes?
So a couple thoughts on this. One is landslides are natural in those areas. They're actually beneficial. That's where the gravel actually gets into the stream and comes downstream. And so most of the landslides are not a risk or not, they're actually good to have those up in the upper basin. Just one quick thought on that. If you do have a water wave coming down, when we're storing water, you're actually gonna have a pool there. So you have a stagnant pool of water raising. And so that wave isn't gonna hit the dam, it's actually gonna hit that pool, which has zero velocity, and that would, it's not necessarily something bashing against the dam, but actually be entering that upstream pool. And so I think the pressures and things of that, the forces you might be worried about against the dam wouldn't necessarily be there when it's starting to store water.
Go back to Boyce Purvis. So my old law partner, Renee Raymond, has a house that was built in 1787, I think. And they, 18, sorry. 18, I believe 1879, 1878, sorry. 800 years old. And they went back and had gotten history from families that lived there, and according to those reports, that house got water up to it in like 1919, 1920. There was a big flood. And the first time they had water in the house was 3 feet in 90, and then they had 3 feet in 96, and they raised their home 6 feet, so 3 feet higher than the 90 and 96 flood. And they got 8 feet of water in 07. And there was a disabled guy who they took out of the sheriff's, took out in a boat off the second floor. Okay. And what the hydrologist has said is that, yes, there was more water coming down the Chehalis Basin for sure than ever on record before. But there wasn't that much more rain. There wasn't 11 feet more of rain than in 1996. The difference there was that all this debris came in, and the bridges broke, and all this debris would hit one of the bridges upstream, and then eventually it would blow out, then it hits the next one, and then it blows out. And so that bridge that washed up, just a bunker, held back artificially. And you probably know Luke, the lawnmower guy. I mean, he was there, and he said the water stopped, and then it's rising. So again, there was an artificial factor there that increased those floods. But again, if you lower the main stem coming downstream, you have less of that, whatever you want to call it, artificial impact as well. All right. Yes.
Jay, you've talked about all these different things that have to be managed after it's built. Who does that? Like, is Lewis County going to start a
flood zone district?
Yeah. Who does it, and who pays for it ongoing? Is it us or the state or?
Good question. So this is old. This is 8 years old. So take it for what it's worth. But the first estimates that the county got was it's going to be $800,000 to $1 million a year to maintain the area above the reservoir and the facility, and that number might be a lot higher. But that's the only thing I can give you right now. The answer to that is we'll see. It could just be a Lewis County project. It could be a state Lewis County project. It could be, if the tribes ever got to the point where they were comfortable with all of this, they might have an ownership in it.
But somebody's going to be the guy in charge of letting them down. And, and I know that dam safety, and they lack a lot of safety, so you're always doing stuff.
I mean, my only interest in the thing is if there's one of these storms, it gets used, right? Other than that, do what you want, do what you want. But, yes.
On your fish habitat, I've done a lot of crane work and been around some bridge replacements, so this, and no disrespect to kind of this so-called fish habitat projects. And I have asked county engineers, Lewis County, Grays Harbor County, and in your project here, like, your project, but the project that you're kind of promoting here, I want some numbers. I've run across people in the know before they start a bridge project. You have a fish count prior to, and they look at you like kind of the RCA dog look, And I says, well, we got to come back in a year and a half or 2 years and find out what the improved fish count is.
Right.
I have yet to see a number on any of them. Now, if you really, in my personal perception, if you really want to put some mileage, as far as the county gentleman here and yourself, behind that fish habitat, give me some numbers. I drive along the road and I see these signs that says Salmon Restoration Project, and everybody's beating their chest. Well, we don't know what the previous fish count is to what supposedly the new fish count is. And in the logging world, we're beat to death on putting little bridges over streams like culverts were years ago, and we still don't know if we're improving the fish count. And if you're going to spend the money and it works, hey, more power to you. But give me some concrete numbers.
So,
or even an estimate.
So I'm just as complete a fish biologist.
You could get more credibility out of your presentation.
I hear you.
If you can do numbers.
I hear you. So the best I can give you is this. Those are numbers, but that's not, here's this project, but Basin Alive, all I can give you is that's what the fish biologists say the numbers are, and they're going to be, and that's what it could be if you do all this habitat work. That's the best I can give you.
What's the correlation between the dam and the habitat?
The EIS is about that. Is about how much impact, negative impact, will building this thing have on the fishery because it's there. And if there is a net negative on the habitat, then can the district propose enough other habitat projects so that it's a net not loss for the fishery? That's not the only question, but that's probably the biggest question in this whole EIS. And I just saw this in the last week or two. The WDFW has for a long time been tracking, doing what they call census of these fish runs and where they spawn and so on in the basin. And there's 0 to 2% of the spring Chinooks spawn above this site, above PL. Not 0, but it's a really small percentage. It's about 0 to 1% of the the fall Chinook. It's about 7% of the steelhead. So proportionally a larger percentage of the steelhead. And I've forgotten what coho is, but I don't remember. But you know, as a percentage of the basin fishery, it's a small factor. And what the district has biology fishery people here working on this. They say we can more than offset any losses as a result of this facility by doing habitat.
So the loss to the fish would be because of the occasional flooding that would kill the reds, or
yeah, yes. So again, this is what I've been told, right? That if let's say salmon spawns above the dam site, and there sit the eggs in the winter. Now you close that reservoir for 2 weeks or whatever, and now you've made the water stagnant, and the sediment that's coming down from up above now settles and kills those reds. So there's what I understand to be the negative impact. Now, Matt doesn't like it when I say this, but here I've had several off Chehalis basins had quite a few biologists tell us, if you get flows of 50,000 CFS coming through that canyon, there ain't nothing alive there afterwards, period. And the eggs are in a farmer's field in Adna. So you know, what's the net? But that's not the way the government looks at it. The government looks at it that if this facility is in place and it causes these damages, then those have to be mitigated. So that's the way the flood zone district is approaching.
Do you see this as a Trojan horse
For
the habitat restoration that's going on now? From the political, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I guess I'd say maybe people from the Chehalis and the Connaught would say that their habitat projects are a Trojan horse for this project. Maybe. I don't see it that way. I mean, I see a lot of interests that don't usually sit at the same table trying to figure out, is there a way forward on both of these problems? And I see them either going forward together or stopping, and then 20 years from now, people can...
Don't you see the dam, I mean, it's going to take a lot longer than a lot of this habitat restoration that's going on?
Actually, the other way around. This thing, I mean, physically, could be built in 2 to 3 years. I'm not saying 2 to 3 years from now. I'm saying if you just say, okay, go build it, it's a 2 to 3 year project. Whereas to go up and down the basin and say, hey, you own some land on the Chehalis River, can we talk about getting habitat, buying an easement from you, blah, blah, blah. That's a decades-long project to get that much habitat.
So is all the permitting to get the thing going. I mean, you're going to have people, you know,
to get
fighting it all the way along.
Well, we're here, and I mean, the EIS, as we expect, will be out within the next year.
That's just the start of it.
Yeah, well,
I mean, once we get to the permitting, we're going to have all kinds of lawsuits.
There'll be more lawsuits. Yep.
You're
right. You're right.
And none of us in this room will probably be alive when it starts.
Maybe. You know, that's valid. But you get back to the table at the Chehalis Basin. And the way it's set up, it takes 6 out of 7 votes of that board to approve $1 for anything. Okay, so sorry, you can't build this thing for 30 years, well, I guess then we haven't succeeded in finding a basin-wide solution to fish and flood, have we? So I guess we'll have to stop. I'm just saying there's a shared interest in keeping going, and if somebody if I tried to stop the habitat work, half the people would be gone. Same thing as the other side.
So Jay, in 1946, Truman said, okay, let's do something about this. Fast forward all these years. Doug can remember back then. But in the meantime, one of the questions I keep hearing is, why is the government allowing filling in the wetlands in the flood zone and building more, which is displacing water, which is exacerbating the problem?
And you shouldn't. And that's, I guess I'd say, well, I think that's what they put me to say. Building this thing is not the only answer to flooding. And it's not going to stop flooding, it's just going to reduce it from the catastrophic level. And yeah, we got to stop putting people in harm, here, go build a permit, go get a permit to go build in a place where you're going to get whacked.
Well, I eat Sonic hamburgers and Burger King. I mean, I drive a Toyota, yeah. But they're business, and Starbucks. Okay.
That one I got an answer.
Those are being built in the flood zone.
Okay, actually, that one I got an answer to, because those are behind the levee. Okay. All right. So here's the analogy. Here's a bathtub. All right, bathtub, your flood water, right? Chehalis River, peak flood. You put a bucket in it. Are you going to raise level? Yes. But if the bucket's already there, and now you fill the bathtub and you put rocks in the bucket, are you raising the water in the tub? No. And that levee is the bucket. And that bucket's been there since 1943. And building in, should that airport have been built there? No. but it's there, and there's a levee that is protecting. And so you are not, and I've been through this too. They model it as though that, 100 acres or something behind the levee was to eternity, was to infinity. And you're not going to have a measurable impact downstream because you've got the levee. It's the levee that's causing the raising of the water outside. It's not Sonic behind it. And, yeah.
On that levee on the airport, somebody needs to come to reality. And I know we're getting away from the dam project, but the point was brought up, okay? I've shot the elevation on that. That's not a levee. That's a horseshoe. The upper south end of that is wide open. Yeah. It never has changed since that county road was built in there. Yeah. The low part of it, and you're exactly right, is on the north end. I've hauled equipment over there and helped them rebuild that pump station that's on the very north end of it. And that is the lowest point, I think, of the whole northwest corridor. But we've got the ill-fated idea that we have a levee around there. Yeah. No, water can come right across. And I'm not a hydrologist, I'm a realist. Yeah. That county road there that goes, the airport road that goes down there, it's at the same elevation it's been for 50 years. They built a levee up around it because in that direction, because when the Blazer brothers used to farm that, and they flew, before that they flew, it was an airport deal, the water came from the north to the south. Came in there, that's why the pump station's there. But that levee is not completely around that airport. And that's why I've shot the elevation on that.
And that's why we have the engineer here to tell you more about that levee. Because it isn't just raising the current one.
I will say, Jay, so the levee wasn't built to like current standards you'd build a levee to, which is like 100-year freeboard, like a certain storm. It was whatever standards they had back when they put it in place. It probably does have these higher low spots. The intent is to bring it up to current standards, and so that it would actually provide protection that it doesn't provide now. So.